All right, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar related to working with social media influencers in the political space. We have quite a few people who've registered today, so we're just going to wait just a moment for everyone to join. The participant list is rising, so rather than jump into things and have to repeat it a few times, we're going to give it just 1 minute for all the participants to jump in. I am joined by my friends at AtAdvocacy. We will do formal introductions in just a moment, but let's hang on for maybe just 1 minute, and then we will be right back with the start of the webinar. All right. Got a minute or two after. Thanks for joining us. We'll go through some quick housekeeping. You'll notice in the chat box, I just put a real quick message in there. Please do let us know who you are and where you're from, whether you want to mention the organization or the campaign you're with, or where you are in the country. It's really cool to be able to see where people are. We usually have people from all around the country on these webinars, so that's kind of fun. We love to make these really engaging, so thank you, Alan. You get a prize for being the first person to comment in chat. I don't know what that prize is. We don't have anything. Maybe we have to send you one of our lefty donkeys. We have to figure that out. Chuck in Boston, thank you. Appreciate it. Please do just pop in there so we know where you are. If you're with a campaign or if you're with some sort of organization, please do go ahead and do that. Just a couple brief things for housekeeping before we get started. One, yes, we are recording this. So we will, at the end of this webinar, usually takes us about 24 hours, we put together closed captioning, and then we also put together the video and make sure that it's ready to roll, and then we either put that on YouTube or we just send it around via email. So everyone who's registered and attending will get a copy of an email which has a link to this webinar, replay, and some other information from the team at AtAdvocacy and for us as well. So you'll be able to see that probably within 24 hours. Give us, maybe a day to get that all together. The reason sometimes it takes a little bit longer is we have questions during the webinar, and we like to answer all the questions, as many as we can get to, but sometimes we have super engagement and we can't answer all the questions. So if that's the case on this one, I'll round up with the team at AtAdvocacy and we'll answer those questions and try to put them in an email or some form that everybody can digest them. We'll also be downloading the chat as well so that you all can see that in case we post any links and stuff like that. So we'll do that as we get rolling. So that's it. Yeah, so cool. So this is the social media, working with social media influencers in the political space. It's a really exciting webinar, and we've been wanting to do this for a long time. And the team at AtAdvocacy, who we'll introduce in just a moment, are literally experts in this world. This is what they do. It's been really interesting to see how social media has affected politics and been involved with kind of message dissemination, really from its inception, people trying to figure out, how are we going to use this medium to get our message out? And then later on, how do we use this medium to build our brand, or even to find things like volunteers and now donors and fundraising and things like that. And I think some years that it's changed, right? It's been interesting. I mean, if you look at Fetterman's campaign from last year, where he was kind of trolling Dr. Oz, I think you see social media take on a little bit of a different vehicle for getting a message out. And of course, the power of influencers seems to just be increasing every year in every direction, in every industry. And of course, we want to take advantage of that here. So I do want to introduce our two friends at AtAdvocacy, Sabrina and Stuart, who can, maybe just introduce yourselves, say a quick minute, and then we'll jump right into this webinar for everyone.
Yeah, hi, I'm Stuart Perlmutter. I'm the founder and CEO of AtAdvocacy, and thank you, Craig. I really appreciate everybody joining us today.
Yeah, hey everybody. My name is Sabrina Collins Childers. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the digital strategist with AtAdvocacy and really jazzed to be talking with everybody today.
Awesome. Thank you both. Very cool. Okay, so let's launch into it. I'll jump over to our first slide and let you go from here.
Well, actually, the
Back
first
up.
slide was what we were on. Yeah, spoil the first question we have. So, hi again. I'm Stuart. He, him. I'm the founder and CEO of AtAdvocacy. I figured before we launched into the work, I would just give a little background on why I got into the work and where we are. So I was not a TikToker or social media person really. I was somebody who was working on Capitol Hill 16 years ago. And at that time, even as the media landscape was fragmenting, there was still this sense that if you got an article in the New York Times or you got a spot on the national news, then you were making a splash. And fast forward to 2021, 22, it really didn't feel that way anymore. We're living in a world where only 8% of people are getting their news from newspapers. And so my first question is, how many of you get your news from social media, at least to some extent?
Yeah, we're going to launch this poll so people can pick here. It'd be interesting to see. I remember some really old like Pew Research polls on this, Stu, about trying to track this as social media longitudinally, becomes a bigger part of. I think they did it in the United States and then they did it worldwide. But I remember the report that I saw was mostly the U.S. and tracking from minuscule, like people still use newspapers and TV and cable news, and then to what it is today, which is a much larger percent.
Right, and to Sarah's point here, it's a moving needle, right? You don't suddenly switch from, oh, I watch TV and I read the newspaper and I listen to the radio. It's a sliding scale of more and more people are getting more of their news from social media. Very few people, of course, get their news from exclusively one source.
I'm going to end this poll real quick. Looks like we got it mostly filled out. Kind of interesting results here. Let's put this up real quick so people can see. Looks like about
Right, so
3/4.
yeah, and that's actually really consistent with what we see. And now we can go to this next slide here, where 80% of the general public is getting at least some of their news on their phones from social media at a time when people are really trusting legacy media less and less. And on top of that, 4 out of 5 Americans are, in the last year alone, bought something that they saw marketed by a social media influencer. And that's not millennials and Gen Z. A lot of times people think of this as a young person's game, and it is, but it goes beyond that. This is 4 out of 5 Americans, whether it's teenagers or retirees. Everybody seems to be responding to this. So we're living in this world where there's no more single Walter Cronkite that everybody listens to, or as Sabrina says, and the rest of our Gen Z staff, who's Walter Cronkite? That's true. We're now living in a world where everybody's getting their news from different places, which also means that everybody has their Walter Cronkite. So that means that if we can harness that power and coordinate it, we can start to speak to everybody in a way that will move the needle like we haven't seen really in decades since the consolidation of the media. And so that's really what we started to do. How can we have that same impact that seems to be lost?
Yeah, Craig, if we could pull up that next slide. So this is just a snapshot of some of our network. And so what we'll be talking about today is specifically political creators, creators who have made their name on progressive values on social media. And so I would not be surprised if a lot of these folks look familiar to you. We've got people like Olivia, who do lots of really awesome work on reproductive rights and access. Josh and Skylar are really some of the go-to authorities on social media across platforms for queer and trans rights. And while everybody kind of has their niche, like their specific issues that really excite them and kind of what drew them to this work, each of them is able to talk about a wide range of political values, progressive values on their pages in a really meaningful way. And so, like I said, this is just a snapshot of our network. We actually have over 200 accounts who have a cumulative audience of 70 million, and that grows every single day. And so it is a massive, massive audience that we are able to connect our partner organizations on the left with folks like the ones you're seeing on the screen to share messaging that stays in their own voice. That's really, one of the key parts of this is keeping everything in the creator's unique voice. That's why people follow them, but putting out good messaging that brings new issues to light for their audiences. I'll pause and say that there's a lot of different approaches to working with influencers. So there are some kind of firms or companies like us who do this work. We're certainly not the only ones. And then there's other organizations who will try to do this in-house. It's a lot of work, trust us. That's why we've got like a whole staff that does this. But there are people who will do this in-house for their organizations and kind of make it its own little department within what is usually a very strapped digital team. And so, there's benefits to every approach. There's cons to every approach. What we'll talk about here today is specifically working with political creators. So we're not working with the foodies, the fashionistas, the lifestyle creators, and there's certainly a place for that. That's just not specifically what we're talking about. So want to put that out there from the beginning. Another thing that kind of defines our approach with creators is we believe in doing this in a paid capacity with creators. There are certainly organizations who have done meaningful creator work on an unpaid kind of favor basis. We see real value to paying creators and investing in the creator economy so that this work is more sustainable. And if you work with these people, I'm lucky enough to consider a good number of the folks in our network personal friends at this point. And if you see the kind of work that goes into this content, I think that you would too agree that doing this in a paid capacity is really the way to go, and I think where the industry is moving. But some of the benefits to that, you can do this at any price point. So I want to throw that out there too. Don't want anybody to feel like, this might be beyond anybody's means. You can do creator work at really any size of budget. But the benefits to paid work, you really get folks unified in messaging, but again, it stays in their own voice. You can have multiple rounds of review to make sure that everything in your messaging brief and your talking points stays exactly as you want it. Again, maintaining that creator voice. And then the call to action that's included. So throughout this entire webinar, we'll be talking more and more about the real world impact. And to us, that's paramount. So the call to action that you're putting in there is that getting folks to sign a petition, donating, sharing certain messaging. So share this with 3 friends. What is that call to action? What is the impact you're looking to have in the real world? And when you're doing this on a favor basis, sometimes it's really hard to make sure that those calls to action actually make it in there. So anyway, lots of different ways to do this. I hope that I've laid out here kind of our overview approach, and we'll get more into the nitty gritty, but I'll turn it back to Stuart.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, there are so many different approaches to working with content creators, and it really depends on what the objectives are, what the resources are. There's no right or wrong, except just make sure you know who you're working with, because there's at least one firm out there who is kind of masquerading as nonpartisan, but just do your research. So if you find White House 2019 in their LinkedIn profile, in the founder's LinkedIn profile, they might not be on our side. So just be careful in that. But other than that, there are lots of really effective ways to work with folks. And then as far as what Sabrina was saying about the impact and the reach, just our network alone, which is a little over 200 accounts, just under 75 million in reach, they're reaching on a day-to-day basis. They're getting 100 million views between them. So real quick question, can anybody throw out what Fox News is getting on a nightly basis, viewership-wise?
Drop it in the chat. Just
yeah,
I'm going to open the chat. I'm curious what you all think.
I don't actually know this number either. 10 million for Fox News, 2 to 3 mil from Dave. 3 mil.
we're a little all over the place. Some got really, oh, we got some that are really close.
Margaret says a very
I like
scary
Margaret's
number.
answer. Margaret's answer is
A
right.
very scary number of people. A very scary number of scary people. That's right. It's actually 1.57 million. So Marcelo was really close there. So we're talking about this crew alone, which is by no means exhaustive, and we think they're wonderful, but by no means exhaustive as far as the number of people out there creating on social media in the progressive space. 60 times more reach on a daily basis. And we don't doubt the real world impact that Fox News has had, unfortunately. So we want to harness a much bigger power and put it to good use. And so if you want to skip the next slide, Craig, this is how we see the impact working. This is how our campaigns work and how we believe that they can work for both campaigns and progressive organizations. So when we start with this team of people, sometimes people say, well, you're starting with these progressive authorities, people who talk about democratic politics. Aren't you preaching to the choir? And that is absolutely what we're doing. They have a very large choir. They preach, and that choir, because of the authority that these guys have, that choir sings. And they sing on social media, they share, they come up with new posts, they repeat that messaging. We see time and again that messaging is working its way out of social media into conversations with friends and neighbors, and then working its way into legacy media, which we'll get to a little bit later in our one of our case studies. But we call this the organic army of micro-influencers. So we start with this core group who are setting the tone of the discourse. People are following them to take their cues, and then it gets repeated and actions get taken. And so that's what leads you to new followers, new donors, new subscribers. You can set that messaging tone, like I said, which then leads to earned media. And of course, the power to create buzz on social media is really unrivaled. Another thing that isn't actually listed on this slide, but is super important, is rapid response. Once you've got a team in place of content creators who are working with you somewhat regularly, when that disinformation gets out, they are ready to go. You give them the facts, they put it out there. It's not just them dispelling a myth, but it's arming their supporters to engage with people and really stop a lie before it can spread.
Stu, we're getting a couple questions from the crowd, and I think we'll answer these as we go along. So I don't think we necessarily need to stop now. But one of the questions was related to whether this is an effective channel for candidates, say at the state rep level, state legislative level, instead of, big federal campaigns. And I know we are getting to that. I know we're kind of building, hey, new followers, control, new donors, earned media. That's relevant to everyone. And then the second question we got was, can you target certain states or certain efforts? If you're trying to put together a big effort in a certain area, maybe a regional area in a certain state, how do you do that? So, if we wrap maybe those questions in as we're moving along, that might be helpful for some of the people.
That's actually a great segue because we're about to talk about Wisconsin. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is give me a few minutes and we'll talk about it.
Perfect.
Yeah. If you want to kick it over to Stuart, I'm sorry, were you finished with that slide?
No, go ahead. Yeah, that's perfect. That's a great segue.
It was an awesome segue, so I just had to take it. And as Stuart mentioned, so we're talking about state-specific initiatives. We're talking about earned media, legacy media. So all of that's wrapped up into what we're about to talk about with the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. And so, as a lot of you guys probably are familiar, the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, their digital apparatus is kind of unrivaled. Like, they are really, really great at what they do. And yet they've found a lot of effectiveness in working with social media creators, even with having a very flushed out digital team. So just a little bit of background, if anybody's not familiar with kind of what's been going on in Wisconsin. So back in the spring, Wisconsin had a special election for a Supreme Court justice position that was vacant. And Wisconsin, very consequential swing state. That Supreme Court has the power to uphold or overturn an election result. So super consequential for Democrats across the nation. But how do you get people, we're based in Kentucky, so how do you get people in Kentucky to care about the special election Supreme Court thing happening in Wisconsin? So we worked with social media creators to do that. Spoiler alert. This was a 3-month initiative in the beginning of this year. One of my favorite campaigns that we've done. to date, but we were really trying to generate social media buzz and enthusiasm around Wisconsin's Supreme Court race. And what's really cool, I know I mentioned legacy media, we'll get to it, but we initially positioned this as the most important election you've probably never heard of. And then later, the most important election of 2023. And what's really cool is that if you do a quick little Google of that phrase, you will see it sprinkled throughout legacy media as they were reporting on this race. I don't think that that's a coincidence, but I'll leave that to you to decide. Yes, wisdoms, woot woot, I agree. Craig, do you care to kick it to the next one? So we've been talking about kind of this political social media landscape on the left in the abstract, and you're probably sitting there thinking like, okay, so what does this look like? This is a really good example of what a multi-platform campaign looks like. All of the posts look wildly different, and that's exactly what you want because it's staying in the creator's voice. This is each unique creator's approach to the same exact messaging. So I think that's really cool to see. And our goals here were really straightforward. So awareness and excitement, both nationally and in Wisconsin, because we need national donors, we need national support, and we need people on the ground in Wisconsin and getting out the vote, the most important aspect of all of this, because it doesn't matter if people don't get to the polls. So those are really our main goals here. And I just love to look at these kind of the slides of all of the different posts because they are just so unique. And I think it really speaks to the creators. I mean, they're the experts. They're the experts in messaging, and that's why this works.
And then if you wanted to kick it to the next slide, please, I'll show you. I think that this also really relates to the questions about how it translates to local. Now, there are two approaches, I should say. We also will recruit around specific areas. We can identify new creators who maybe are on our network, maybe not, who can speak with some authority in localities. But what we see when we do these national pushes is that enthusiasm on a national level fires people up locally. And you see a lot of these posts that sprang up organically off of our posts are about people saying, I voted, I'm voting early. I live in Wisconsin and I'm voting for Janet. In the work that we did in the lead up to last week's election, we saw people, especially in Virginia, say, I was really planning to skip this election. I was going out of town, but you put in my head how, they don't say you put in my head, they say it like normal people, but they say, you know, I'm going to vote because of what you put out there. And that's really cool to see. And I'm going to take a quick moment and deviate from this slide and just talk about some of that work. Specifically, we did a race this past cycle around Bucks County, Pennsylvania. So really lasering in on one area. And the Republicans were trying to position this woman as this candidate as this centrist. And she was full on MAGA, Trump turned DeSantis person. And so we exposed her for that. And we brought a lot of national ire, and she ended up finishing dead last in that race. So it can have a really pronounced effect at a national level, at a local level, even when the campaign itself is national. We did another one, I'll do one more. We did another one for an SEIU in Florida where it was one local getting ready to go into negotiations with a hospital. And so we just brought maximum pressure onto that hospital, exposing those conditions. And it just positioned the union to be that much stronger going into negotiations. So I will turn it back over to Sabrina.
So long and short answer, yes.
It's our favorite.
Yes, it is. And the real world impact, we'll hammer on it, but that is really like the main thing here. So Craig, do you mind to put it to the next slide?
Yeah, we have two questions real quick that are kind of focusing on the same type of subject about, can these campaigns and can work with influencers be nonpartisan? Do they have to be associated to a specific campaign party or a candidate, or can they be nonpartisan?
We do a lot of work with 501c3s, and our creators are not affiliated with a party. So we see them as any other kind of spokesperson, the same as when you're buying media on TV or a magazine. It can be partisan, it can be nonpartisan. It's kind of the vehicle. So there are also organizations out there where we work with their PAC, their super PAC, they're C4, they're C3, and so we're always very careful to make sure that we're on the right side of the IRS and the law on those things. So
Perfect.
everybody's to work with us personally. The important thing is that the values are aligned, that they are genuinely trying to make the world a better place. And then if that's in order, the goals are right, then we will find a way to make it work.
I mean, my experience with just influencers in general, whether it's political or someone who's got a voice or has been an active participant in messaging or having a conversation about certain issues, it's not too hard to tell the people who are fake from the people who have a true interest, whether or not they count themselves or truly are an influencer with a following, right? Or whether they're guiding their flock, so to say, to a certain issue or a certain cause or a certain way. My experience is it tends to be pretty transparent, the people who are there for the right reasons, as you say.
Yeah, I think people can sniff out inauthenticity on social media very quickly. It's something that we're very careful about.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
Yeah, so hopping back in to Wisdoms, I come from a data science background, poli-sci, data science. And so I could talk about social listening and this kind of stuff all day. I won't do that. What I will tell you, though, is that what you're looking at right now, so the posts that we just saw were multi-platform, so pretty much all the major platforms. So I think it was TikTok, Instagram, and there was some Twitter sprinkled throughout there. And that's just a snapshot. It was a much larger campaign. So most of the biggest 6 platforms. Social listening, because of lots of limitations, happy to talk more about it offline, because again, I can talk your ear off. But so what you're looking at here is Twitter only. But I think that that's really important to note because for as much as these results tell you, there was a whole other world of posts to this campaign that we can't quantify with social listening. So what you'll see here is for the duration of our campaign, pulling social listening insights on specific keywords. So Judge Janet Protasiewicz, Judge Protasiewicz, things like that, like different variations of the things that we were talking about on this particular initiative over the span of from December of last year into beginning of this year. And the stars that you'll see across this graph indicate every time that we partnered with Wisdoms to put out messaging via our network of creators. And so I think that, you can kind of see here every time that we've partnered, there's a huge spike in traffic on these search terms, and we love to see that. Additionally, one of the things that I think is really cool about this work is that the majority of the time, the buzz kind of that's happening before a partnership is sustained, but it's, it's at you can see it. It's at a lower level than when you see the peaks. But afterwards, that buzz is a little bit higher than it was before, and it builds over time. And so our biggest builds, obviously, in March were around Get Out the Vote. But even in December, when hardly anybody was talking yet about this race, we were able to drive massive traffic and really put it in the minds of people, priming them to think about this race as something that's really important and consequential because it was. And we'll show you some numbers kind of on the conclusion of the campaign. So one of the things we always say over at AtAdvocacy is that impressions aren't impressive. They are the most vanity metric. But I will also say that 17 million impressions is a lot when it comes to a special election that previously no one was really talking about. So impressions are not impressive. We're much more likely to focus on engagements and social listening data like you saw, and we'll continue to see as we go into some nonprofit work. But 1 million engagements on over 17 million impressions, again, on a race that people were not talking about initially. Legacy media had not yet picked up on how important and consequential this race was going to be for the whole nation, but also for Wisconsin. We can go ahead and so, and just wrapping up on Wisdoms. So the real world impact, again, like you can count the impressions, you can count the engagements, but at the end of the day, what was this able to do? So at the end of the day, there was amazing record turnout in Wisconsin, and we were really, really honored to be a part of that mobilization. Janet won her seat. She held on to her seat. And so the real world impact there is that we were able to raise dollars for Wisdoms to help them do this work that ended up keeping Janet's seat, her winning the seat. And then I'm sure, Stuart, I'll kick it to you to talk more about our later work. Again, spoilers, she's still on the court, Republican shenanigans notwithstanding.
Yeah, one of the very cool things, like Sabrina said, we want to see the results beyond social media. If it stops social media, where it's not enough. So over the summer, when Republicans started to talk about this impeaching Justice Janet before she even heard a case, which is flagrantly unconstitutional. I guess it was last month. They came to us and asked for a second mobilization. We needed to peel off two representatives in Wisconsin, two members of the assembly, to kill the impeachment. And the first one peeled off the day after we ran our mobilization. And then the second one came not long after. And effectively, at least for right now, impeachment is dead. So again, it can have a really, really strong impact in the real world. This is our other favorite thing to do. We got to do a pretty large push around the EPA's, President Biden's proposed caps on power plant emissions. So we started with a 60,000. We started by driving 60,000 public comments in favor of the strongest possible caps rules governing power plant emissions. And then after the emission period, or sorry, the public comment period closed, it came out that Edison Electric, which is the utility industry's lobbyist and industry group, was mobilizing to kill these initiatives, while publicly the utilities were talking about how they were greening their emissions and doing everything they could for the environment. So we mobilized first to expose that, and then to drive public pressure in the form of tweets at not just Edison Electric, but at people's individual utilities. And the effect of that was really phenomenal, because first, 8 of the utilities publicly came out and said, we're not with Edison Electric anymore. We're standing with President Biden on this, which was great to see. And then Edison Electric had to come out and release a public statement that distanced themselves from their own position, and specifically referenced what was happening on social media, which was just tremendously fulfilling. And Craig, if you want to pop to the next slide, I'll show some of the specifics about the work. So first, you see kind of a word cloud, the words that are associated with these things. Edison Electric is the center of it. That's what we're focused on. You see EPA in there. You see a lot of the names of the content creators that we were working with. And then below that, you see the sentiment analysis around the conversation on these things. And what was great, sometimes people think of influencer advocacy as painting with a really broad brush, but this kind of gets to the precision that is at our disposal. There's negative sentiment, overwhelmingly negative sentiment on every term associated with Edison Electric, except for Evergreen Action, who was the client that we were working with. So that was really gratifying to see. If you want to flip to the next slide, please.
Yeah, we love being able to really clearly paint the good guys and the bad guys. And so again, kind of digging back into those social listening insights. So the two main keywords on this campaign were tagging Edison Electric and using hashtag utility moment of truth. That was the hashtag that Evergreen had been using to do a lot of this kind of public pressure calling out Edison Electric work. And what this is showing you is social listening insights, again, just on Twitter, pulling the main drivers of traffic, so the top influencers on each of those search terms. And anybody who's highlighted in blue are folks who were a part of our mobilization, part of our network. And so it's really cool to see, there's always this conversation about correlation versus causation, but this is really showing you who is driving those keywords and the sentiment that Stuart just talked about in the last slide. And you love to see it when it's the people that you worked with to do the campaign.
We'll show you the wrap up numbers on the next slide. So just this campaign obviously generated some big numbers as well. It's almost 7.5 million people. 500,000 people took action. 60,000 public comments submitted. Now, I should also say our work with Evergreen driving public comments was part of a 100,000 public comment push, which was a huge success for them. We got an eighth of that budget and drove 60% of that. And so that really shows you the power that influencers can have in this work. That's literally 10 times, just over 10 times more effective than the more traditional sources that they were using in digital and otherwise. And of course, those 25,000 tweets directly at people's local utilities. You want to talk about the local impact. That's that right there in a nutshell. And I think that wraps up our slides, other than our fancy cover slide at the end.
Well,
Should
cool.
we
Let's
open
go
it up for
into
questions?
let's go into some of the remaining questions. This would be a good time. And I didn't mention this at the outstart during the housekeeping, but I want to mention it now. Whenever if we run into any tech issues or anything like that for the people on the line, we have quite a few participants still here. We will always reach back out to you right away via email with a new link. We don't expect any problems, but if we ever run into tech issues, just know that we're already like 40 minutes in, so we should be fine, but just in case. So a couple unanswered questions. One was, what size of an organization would typically use this kind of marketing vehicle? You know, what works best for getting email addresses for local Democratic clubs? You know, specifically one Lauren asked that just uses, say, a website and Facebook only.
Yeah, we work with organizations of all sizes. As far as getting email addresses, we did one school board race one time. You know, you target by zip code, by interest. You can find the right people for a list. We of course obviously work with very, very large organizations, but it's not uncommon for us. And of course, we're again one way of working with progressive content creators. We've helped launch packs from scratch, very small races. I'm bullish on whether you're working with us or somebody else, or you're working directly with influencers. The results that we've seen are so transformative that I think that whatever size an organization is, it's worth working with people who have large social media followings and respected voices on the issues that your organization is focused on.
Let me ask another question here. This is coming from someone who's anonymous. Can you talk about the structure or the setups of creator partnerships and how that might affect disclosures that the creators might need to include in their posts, if any?
I'll field the legality of that, Sabrina, if you want to take over the mechanics. Legally, if it is political speech, there are no requirements for social media content creator posts. And the reason for that is that the FCC is the body that has established those rules for corporations. Political speech is not governed by the FCC, it's governed by the FEC. And they've established no laws around that. Now, sometimes creators want to tag partners. Sometimes it's advantageous for the partners, but it's purely optional from a legal standpoint.
Yeah, so you won't see a like hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored on a vast majority of these. There will be some times where, you know, if we ever were to work with like an ethical corporation client or something like that, like there would be disclosures necessary there. But again, we really leave it up to the creators. One thing to note is that if you're doing influencer work in-house or whatever, that anything, if you were to do hashtag ad or hashtag sponsored or something, that does really kill engagement. And so, you know, it's just something to consider, but no, there are no legal requirements for political speech like that.
I would imagine that most of these are being done as normal posts through the respective channel, as opposed to, say, you know, paying an influencer to run ads on their own network. I mean, that almost wouldn't make sense, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
well, and something that we always say, you know, with our influencers, I meet with each and every one we onboard. You know, we don't want to ask them to do work for us for free because we believe in paying them, but we also have very clear values on not wanting creators to say anything for us that they wouldn't say for free on their platform. And that's one of the real like guiding principles of our work. And so at least in the like, you know, personally feeling comfortable putting out certain content, I think that at least with our approach and our creators, they know that the things they're partnering with us on are things that they would advocate for anyway. And so while they are technically being paid for the post, it's more to keep that work sustainable for them than to pay them to say something that they don't believe. So.
And that also gets to your point, Craig, about authenticity, that yes, we from a value standpoint don't want them to say anything they wouldn't say for free, but also their audiences will sniff it out. It will not be as effective for the client, for them. So.
And that's been my experience too. And I think you get one thing when, say, you are watching someone who's trying to sell shoes or sell a course or some type of program, and you know that's what you're getting into. You know you're using their experience or maybe their position in a certain industry, and you understand that there's kind of that sales transaction. Where I think the unknown nature of some of this when it relates to issues and causes is, how is this person who's known as being an influencer in maybe one industry, or in a case speaking out for a specific issue, is trying to move other people toward that position or that issue? And I think the answer is, if that person is authentic, and if that person is someone who is saying something in a way that is generating followers, then those people are generally going to be moved by what that influencer has to say. That's been my experience, at least. And like you said, sniff out the junk pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, a couple more questions. Let's see. What do you think? Actually, let me do this one last from Kristen, because I think we might go on this one a little bit longer. But as far as candidate fundraising is concerned, when it comes to working with influencers, does the candidate need to be in a, quote, sexy make or break race for it to be worth it?
For it to be worth it? No, it certainly helps. But our feeling is, in this era where democracy is actually under serious threat, we've always been able to find something to really anchor the message in around a race. And so that will mean sometimes, if we're doing a national campaign for a localized audience, that will sometimes mean, with coordination with the campaign, throwing out the messaging that they're using locally, because nobody cared about Bucks County issues on the national stage. What they cared about is, how does this connect to the larger movement that they care so much about? And sometimes that's about who's the villain. Sometimes it's about, how do you tie the significance of the winner of this race to another issue. Obviously, abortion rights are one of several, but probably the biggest motivator in politics right now. And so it's really just about finding that angle.
And the thing I'll add to that is part of the benefit of working with influencers, because they are the messaging experts. And so I see a question about kind of the messaging, maintaining message discipline, and we can get into more of that. But like you saw with the screenshots of the Wisdoms posts, like, we gave everybody the same messaging and they went a million different ways with it. And so creators know like what specifically works with their audience, which will be different from creator to creator. And so that's kind of the benefit to bringing in those experts as partners, instead of trying to make something sexy that isn't. Normally, you're able to give that messaging over to them and they'll find a way to tie it into the news of what's happening across the nation, tying it into the touch point issues for Democrats. And so it's always worth that conversation to see. I mean, there's always going to be things where, there's always going to be things that are more challenging to message than others, but I don't think that it has to be a sexy race for it to resonate.
I think some of these questions, and correct me if I'm pulling this up wrong here. I think Ruth asked that, and I think Lauren had a question about some other message stuff. It seems like some of the questions are coming at the angle like, what would we need to prepare if we're going to work with people? What do they expect? That kind of thing. And again, it's just my opinion. And, maybe Sabrina and Stu, you can add a comment here, but if you're running a campaign, obviously you need your vote get goals, right? You need to understand what you need to do to win in your district if it's a campaign. If you're doing, you're a PAC and you're trying to, change a vote or influence legislation, obviously you're going to have a different metric, but you need to think about that just like you would think about a vote get goal if you were running a campaign. you need to think about your message, right? So like if you don't have a focused message, I don't think working with an influencer is really going to help you much. Like, I think you need to figure out what your message is, what your angle is before, so you can get some of that information to the influencers. I mean, is that like a correct statement?
I mean, yes and no. It certainly helps when people come to us with a really refined message. But like I said, we will people will sometimes come to us with very localized messaging that, yeah, if we're going to run that through local influencers with local audiences will work, but won't work on the national stage. Sometimes we get talking points that aren't going to resonate with our audiences, and so we'll work with the campaigns. I mean, that's kind of the benefit to Sabrina's point about the experts that we have in our network is you kind of can come to us without, wherever you are in your messaging process, we'll try to fill in the gaps as best we can, and then you get to see it tested in real time.
Yeah, and on our end, we help. So generally, just in terms of process, because I think that to Ruth's question, like that was some of the thing of like what the process is itself. And generally, we'll meet with an organization about their objectives, what it is they're trying to do, and then we know how to package messaging for the influencers in a way that's going to make sense to them. So there are times where we'll get messaging guidance from an organization, and it's like 20 plus pages of things that like influencers, it's just not the right packaging for influencers. But we're then able to take it as kind of the liaison between the organization and the influencer and put it in that right package. And then even from there, the influencer takes it and runs with it in their own creative ways. And so yes and no, like it's always nice if you have an idea, but really it's just like you need to have an idea of your goals, I think, more than key messaging points. If you don't know what it is you're trying to achieve with this, then there's really no metric for success, and we can help you figure that out. But at the end of the day, like if you don't know what change it is you're trying to affect with your organization, your candidate, whether it's dollars raised, emails generated, what have you, if you don't have that in mind, it's going to be really hard to feel like this work's been beneficial. So
that makes sense, and hopefully it answers the question that the commenter had there. I have two other questions. One of them is legal related, one of them is budget related. I'll ask the budget question first. This comes from Wit. How do you think about dedicating budget to influencer engagement? Had Evergreen Action dedicated more budget, would it have scaled relative to the investment? And are there minimums that you recommend?
Yes. Well, okay. So to the first part of the question, we had a long debrief with Evergreen after that first part of that campaign. It actually happened in two sections, and so they did a first push, which was their bigger push. The content creators in our network way outperformed their other avenues. So they reallocated the entire second push to our content creator push. And it did actually a little better the second time. And so that is the nice thing about the reach, is that it not only tends to scale more investment means more results, but it tends to scale exponentially. Just because of the way that social media can take on a life of its own, posts ping pong off each other, it reaches more people, they share with their friends. So yeah, it can scale. It can scale to the moon and back. There's really no limit to it. And we tell our larger clients, and this has been borne out time and again, that the second $25,000 you invest in a single initiative is worth more than the first $25,000 that you invest, and that holds true as you go up. As far as
like getting started or a recommendation for a minimum, that kind of stuff.
So with us, we work on a $5,000 minimum, and the reason for that is really because our philosophy is we're not pairing people with influencers. We're setting up teams and we're setting up strategic campaigns around ideas. Again, we really want to see it get to critical mass, because the bigger investment means exponential growth. And so 5,000 is really that point where we can say, you're going to be happy with your results. And if we go too much lower, you probably will be happy, but we just can't guarantee that. There are, of course, other ways to spend smaller amounts on specific influencers. Other firms do things differently. And then just something to keep in mind is that frequently when we're doing messaging pushes, there's a secondary objective around either fundraising or opt-in acquisition, and that can offset through immediate ROI. I mean, frequently it's more than half. Sometimes they're making a profit. They're basically getting paid to put these messages out there, which you love to see. So it's just one more way that it's a really cost-effective approach.
And a thing to note just on budgets is that when you're talking about different platforms are going to cost different ranges, just because a tweet is a lot easier to put together and go through edits than filming an entire video. So you're not going to get a fully fleshed out multi-platform TikTok, Instagram, YouTube campaign for $5,000. But that's why I said initially, like, there's a way to do this work at every price point. I really do think. And so, it does scale. And when you're looking at the video content, just because of how much more work it is for the creators, and it's a kind of face-to-face, like multiple minutes worth of content. So those do scale up. And so, don't want anybody to be like confused that a $5,000 budget is going to get you like multiple TikToks. But it does scale, and there's always a way to do it at any budget.
I want to ask a couple questions. One's a really good follow-up to what you're saying, Sabrina. But before we do that, because I want to be respectful of people's times, we have about 10 minutes left. I think we planned for an hour, but I'm going to launch a quick poll, and we do this whenever we work with partners. We have a lot of questions, and this is one of our more engaging webinars, and we still have 5 or 6 questions that are still open. So I want to try to get to them, but we also put something up directly here. So I'm going to launch this poll, and if you would like to hear directly from AtAdvocacy, if you'd like to maybe explore the opportunity of working with them, or social media influencer marketing in general, just click here on this poll, and we'll deliver that to them so they can reach out to you separately. This is our way of kind of doing this, so we're just not randomly reaching out to everyone who don't want to be contacted. So you can do that. I'll leave this up as I ask the next couple questions here. This is a follow-up to what you were just mentioning, Sabrina, in terms of budget. Kristen asks, she'd love to get an understanding of how long it takes to get a campaign up and running, and what kind of lead time they should expect for working with influencers.
I love this question. Yeah, so we work on all different types of timelines, but the earlier you can bring us in, the better, and it makes my life just so much easier. So, but we can work on quick turnarounds. But generally, once you have an idea of the goal you're trying to reach, and you want to work with influencers to do at least a part of it, the earlier we're brought in, the better. Because a lot of what we're able to do with, kind of our positions as the liaison between the organization and the influencers is be able to tell you kind of how to guide that strategy. And so that consulting and strategy part of it is honestly like one of my favorite parts of my job. But in terms of like how long it takes to get something up and running, Twitter is a lot faster because, again, it's just copy. And so that can move in the span of a week, less if needed, more, great. But in terms of videos, and the larger the campaign is going to be, the more lead time, the better. The creators need ample time because they submit a draft. And so we'll review that draft. We send it over to the organization for review. Sometimes organizations will want to vet the list of creators that we would recommend working with. And so every like step of approval that's needed is totally fine. It adds time to how long the campaign is going to take. So only like how much legal kind of hoops you have to jump through with that, or even just, wanting a certain amount of control in-house over the work. So that kind of shapes it. But generally, the earlier the better, but we can get things turned around in a matter of week, 2 weeks. Again, if you're coming to us and wanting to do a massive thing, we could give you a more specific answer to that. But generally, it's a week or two, and the earlier the better.
And can I add one thing to that? Is that when we have somebody like Wisdoms, who we work with again and again and again, we're able to mobilize for them very quickly and have done some rapid response around some of their issues, because we've got that team in place, because we already know the tone, because we know how to give people the right stuff, and because they don't need content approval over every single piece anymore, because they've come to develop that trust.
A couple other follow-ups. Tyler asked about just some legalities again. Do state regulators or campaign regulators yet have quote unquote paid for campaign committee, that kind of stuff requirements in social media like they do with campaign literature? I think we kind of hinted at this before when we talked about these are people's organic posts. Like, when you're working with an influencer, they're posting that organically. I wonder though, since it's a paid transaction, whether there are any, disclosure rules in place. And, the answer may be, we don't know. I'm not aware of any that kind of pushes through to that influencer and requires them to do some sort of disclaimer or disclosure on there. But that might not be the case.
Well, we've been doing this for 3 years, and I don't think anybody's had to disclose anything. It's not something that's been raised with us.
Yeah. And again, I'm not an attorney, so please, don't take my legal advice here, but in my reading of a lot of the FEC rules, they do look to be a lot of material, a lot of, ads and things like that on, actual structured ads using ad platforms, mail, a lot of the pieces that Tyler mentions in his Q&A, campaign lit, campaign mail, rally signs, yard sign, billboards, t-shirts, things like that. I'd be curious to know, and maybe this is a follow-up for us to kind of dig more into the legalities, or not the legalities of it, but really the disclosure requirements. And that may be a developing area of the law for social in general.
Well, I think it's because it's FEC, anything that's under the FEC guidelines, the people who make the laws have not shown any interest in adding any requirements for themselves. So for better or for worse.
Cool.
Craig, I'd love to dig back into the Twitter question. I know you were saving that.
Yeah, perfect. So the question that was asked again by Kristen was, what do you think about the effectiveness of Twitter, given the changes that are happening over there? Do you skew less to working on Twitter than other platforms? And then how do you navigate that?
Yeah, and I see Tom's also asking, you keep referring to Twitter. Isn't there a movement away from the platform? So love that question. Sorry if you heard my computer ding. My do not disturb just ended. But yeah, so I think that we do still work on Twitter to an extent, but we have definitely seen the effectiveness of the platform change. And so that's why whenever, we're having those conversations with organizations about your specific goals, we make recommendations based on the platforms that are going to be most effective. And often that's a mix of multiple, so a multi-platform approach. On Twitter, we're still seeing that in terms of if your main goal is just getting a message out there, or if you want to launch a campaign video and it get 1 million plus views, Twitter is still a great place to do this kind of work. But if you're looking to do specific like link click call to actions, we've really seen TikTok as the most effective way to do that. Interestingly, on the Evergreen campaign, the call to action was mostly trying to get people to tweet at Edison Electric and their local utilities. And so it would seem a little bit weird to say that we saw most of our success in that conversion on TikTok, but it's true. People were putting out videos saying, the most effective thing you can do right now is get on Twitter. That's where these organizations, where the utilities live. That's where Edison Electric has a following. Go over there and tell them you're not happy about this if you see your local utility on this list of people trying to kill the regs. And so we're seeing that TikTok and YouTube Shorts, Instagram Reels, the video content has really been the most effective in terms of those conversions. But on Twitter, we still use it to an extent. There are still progressive folks over there. Threads has been interesting because there was kind of a point in time where we were doing some work on Twitter and Threads with some of the same creators. It almost seems like it's becoming like the progressive Truth Social, but not, I don't know. I don't know what the lasting power of that's going to be, but at least for now, it seems like Twitter's not going anywhere. The quality of Twitter is getting worse for sure. But people are still on it and people are still getting kind of information there. So we have still had some really effective partners that we'll keep over there until it finally croaks, I guess.
And on top of that, especially for things like campaign launches and videos, not only is it the best place to get your video seen and to experience some virality, but that's where the journalists live and that's where Democratic politicians are. And so if you want to launch a campaign and have a launch video, to me, a Twitter push is a no-brainer. Oh, I think you're muted, Craig.
Thanks. There are one or two questions. Be respectful to that. So there are one or two questions which I'll email Sabrina and Stuart, and maybe we can follow up on that. I think super simple and good for email follow-ups. But thank you all for joining us. This was a great webinar. It was one of our more engaging webinars. So thank you for all the great questions and all the great information from Stu and Sabrina. Really appreciate you doing this webinar with us. I think it's great. And it's really cool to see not only how this has grown, but its impact, and really looking forward to the impact coming up in the 2024 cycle. So hopefully we can have you back, maybe toward the end of next year, or even, this time next year, to report on some of what we saw in 2024, which, from the looks of it, is going to be a really amazing cycle. So thank you, everyone. Really appreciate. You'll see that Stu and Sabrina are dropping in some of their contact information there as well. And you can reach them, the information that's up on the slide, at advocacy.com. Obviously, you can find us at NGP Van. We will be sending out an email within 24 hours with the video, some captions for those who might need the accessibility. And any of the remaining questions that we didn't get to, we will send that to you as well. We'll also send a copy of the chat, because there's a lot of information in the chat. So we could pull that out as a text file and send that out to everyone as well. So really cool. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you. I think our next webinar is going to be in early December about how to figure out your vote get goal for those, especially at the state and local level, thinking about running or starting their campaigns in the new cycle. So we're going to go through how to use NGP Van tools, Vote Builder, things like that, to look at election history and figure out what you need in terms of a vote get goal to win your potential race in 2024. So that's going to be a cool working webinar that we'll do, I want to say, like mid-December, before the holidays. So join us for that one, and we'll see you online. We'll shoot an email out next 24 hours. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Thank you, AtAdvocacy.
Thank you, everyone.